A while back, I made a video called Ethiopia is a Bad Neighbor. It was admittedly one of my weaker videos, and I got a lot of criticism for it. From me, that is. Most of the negative comments I got were mostly nonsense. But I still wanted to continue my series. Country relations are one of my favorite subjects to study. Of course, the most likely next choice was to discuss Russia. Russia is such a bad neighbor that countries 2 countries over consider it a problem. But when you look through all the neighbors of Russia, you realize some have decided to continue the legacy from the former Soviet Union, and they became little menaces. Good news, there's one bad neighbor from every region of the former Soviet Union: Eastern Europe, the Caucasus, and Central Asia. What can I say? I like making videos in segments. It's okay to have terrible leaders if I can have an easier to write script. Just like in the last Bad Neighbors video, I'd like to emphasize that this is only related to the governments and diplomacy of these countries, as most of the civilians of the neighboring countries actually get along with each other. Well, most of them at least. And this shouldn't dictate your entire perception of these countries in this video, especially when some of them are really cool. With that being said, in Eastern Europe, you already know who it is. Often countries will cause some sort of conflict whenever they are having massive problems. The oppressors will artificially create some new target to get off their backs. Colonizing an entire continent? Let's introduce homophobia. Most unhappy country on earth? Let's make a border dispute. Making the formerly cheapest state more and more unaffordable? Blame wokeness. Look, I'm not big enough to make money yet on YouTube. I'll get as political as I want. I came into research ready to just dunk on Belarus, but it wasn't all bad. It was doing better than Ukraine even before the war. It was still below average in Europe, but looking at all these stats only made me realize how bad Italy was. But the big thing in Belarus is the human rights violations. No freedom of speech, intimidation, torture, even kidnapping, and of course, rigged elections. It is easily the least free country in Europe, and because their elections involve literally kidnapping people from other countries, it isn't surprising they've been hit with them sanctions. Dictator Alexander Lukashenko threatened Europe, saying that they will flood the EU with drugs and migrants. See, this is what I mentioned before, if you were paying attention. Now look at the results. How did they do this? Well, they first decided to completely amp up their tourism and ease of access into the country, especially from the Middle East. Come to Belarus, see our lovely Soviet architecture, rustic living, and beautiful forests. Okay, again, I went in looking for low-hanging fruit and found out Belarus is way prettier than I ever knew. Are we sleeping on this nation? I even looked up poor streets in Minsk and got pictures of Rome. I wish I knew all that before making a public video criticizing the Belarus government and getting myself permanently banned from the country. If you didn't know, the EU has open immigration, which means once you are in an EU country, you are free to migrate to any of them. The goal for many migrants is to get into the EU so they can go into one of the most open countries for integration. So the plan is to make migration into Belarus easy, knowing that they will move towards somewhere like Germany. The problem is their neighbor Poland, which is currently strict with their immigrant policy. Belarus spread propaganda claiming that Poland was the opposite and much more progressive than it really is.
Oh! Gay, so gay.
Now you have a massive wave of migrants from places like Syria at the eastern border of Poland, and it has become a massive humanitarian issue because these people are trapped at the border with no resources available to them. But call me a grade school teacher in the West, because we're going to talk about how this suffering affects Europe instead of the people suffering. This has caused quite the political crisis for Poland. But for real, you should do something about this? You might be thinking that Poland is just as at fault here as Belarus, and you could be right, but Poland is not as bad as Belarus. I mean, they are getting more progressive on most of these issues, and their president doesn't have an entire section on Wikipedia on hating Belarusian people. Poland has good relations with their other neighbors for the most part, and we can compare the two with their shared neighbor of Lithuania, where Belarus is doing the same exact thing with migrants. Oh, and Ukraine. But while Belarus has not actively sent any military to Ukraine, they have consistently been an ally to Russia's military, allowing them access to their borders and a place of refuge. Belarus has had broken relations with Ukraine because Belarus mostly blamed Ukraine for the war. Also because they're basically being a Russian puppet state, and they haven't been able to distance themselves from the former Soviet Union. And they want revenge for Chernobyl affecting them more than Ukraine. You know who has done the best job at distancing themselves from Russia? The Stans, baby! Welcome to the Fergana Valley, shared by Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan, the second most chaotic region in Asia. Let's imagine a shared fence between three houses. The yards collide in an awkward spot. This house has their yard, but also has their fence around their fireplace. Then this house built an entire pool in this yard and has built their fence around it. And this yard has this random line of grass with a fence around that. Meanwhile, this doghouse is currently trying to secede and create its own fence. That's basically what we have here. Look at this mess. We got Uzbekistan exclaves in Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan exclaves in Uzbekistan. The Soviet Union created such awful borders that if they ever split up, they would never be stable enough. They don't want them to look better after the USSR. They just love all the republics so much.
It's weird. I'd rather she be alone than with somebody. Is that love?
Now, Uzbekistan definitely has the worst border of them all. It is one of the two countries to be doubly landlocked, being surrounded by other landlocked countries. The other one being Liechtenstein, and no one even cares. They don't even get access to the Caspian Sea. The Soviets practically ruined the Aral Sea, and most of the population of Uzbekistan is tucked right in the Fergana Valley. So what do you do when you have bad borders? Well, that was the task of long-standing ally of the United States, Islam Karimov. Islam Karimov had a strong stance on having clear, protected, demarcated borders. It might make sense to some to be cooperative when you have multiple ethnic groups all in one area, and that making these over-the-top lines based on race is problematic, but not to Islam Karimov, who cared about keeping every inch of sovereignty to Uzbekistan and only Uzbekistan. At least it's better than Ethiopia's plan of colonizing their neighbors only to end up landlocked. Every inch of the border was heavily guarded, and they were overly protective of any exclave. If you want to get to part of your own country, you have to go all the way around to access it. Even though drug smugglers from Uzbekistan were easily able to escort goods out of the country. These strict borders were especially bad for our favorite boy in Central Asia, Tajikistan. See, all of the most fertile land is in the northern panhandle, but is blocked entirely by mountain ranges. So if you want to go from the capital Dushanbe to the second largest city, Khuzand, you have to travel across Uzbekistan to reach around, which was then blocked, basically keeping the country separated from itself.
Please let me go through.
No.
Please?
No.
Please, I need my farms.
Just go build tunnel instead.
Fine, I will build tunnel. I did it. I am a developing nation.
There have been so many conflicts and ethnic tensions in this region, and a lot of them were perpetuated by Karimov. Uzbeks would have conflicts with Tajik and Kyrgyz goods in the country, which led to their neighbors doing the same to Uzbek goods, which basically kept these nations divided. There was a lot of anti-Kyrgyz and anti-Tajik rhetoric coming from Uzbekistan, and Karimov wanted these two to be permanently dependent on their energy. They would shut down pipes to Kyrgyzstan for leverage, they canceled dams in Tajikistan, Kazakhstan would get involved to settle disputes, and Uzbekistan would get even angrier. I haven't even mentioned Karakalpakstan, an autonomous region of Uzbekistan that wants independence and is constantly suppressed. Okay, so who is this guy anyway? Is he really that bad? I mean, all Central Asian leaders do weird things. Tajikistan's president banned YouTube so people wouldn't see him dancing. Turkmenistan's president made a weird rap music video. Kyrgyzstan presidents keep getting removed. Karimov boiled prisoners alive and was one of the worst dictators in history with no human rights to speak of, but he was praised by the United States for his fight in the War on Terror, where he basically arrested and tortured anyone who spoke out about the regime. But in 2016, he passed away, and cooperation between their neighbors has increased heavily, and tensions have drastically lowered. The country itself has becoming more democratic as well. Good job, Uzbekistan. You are now fixed. When making content about geopolitics, it's important to try and have a more neutral, unbiased viewpoint. But sometimes I find that really conflicting. There are two angels on my shoulders, one saying, You shouldn't really pick sides. You don't want to upset your audience who may come from different backgrounds. And the other saying, wow, Azerbaijan kinda sucks, doesn't it? Azerbaijan and Armenia, the never-ending rivalry of the Caucasus. These two have been at it since independence. Actually, they have been at it before that, during the Soviet Union. By the way, I had this video planned out before the news in September 2023, and yes, I'll get to that. Just like in Central Asia, we have ugly borders that make no sense. It's frustrating that we live in a world where we separate others based on arbitrary ideas of race created by Westerners, yet even worse, we live in a world where the will of a group to determine their sovereignty is completely ignored. Look here, this is Nakhchivan. This is an exclave of Azerbaijan, and the population is mostly Azeri. So even though it doesn't make logistical sense, they identify themselves with Azerbaijan, and countries understand that. Here we have Nagorno-Karabakh, which the inhabitants refer to as Artsakh. They are almost all ethnically Armenian and identify themselves with Armenia. But Azerbaijan has a problem with that. Now, Armenia is not totally innocent in their history. After independence began the First Nagorno-Karabakh War. Azerbaijan was seeking to distance itself from Russia, which led to Russia's involvement on the side of Armenia. But it was also apparent that the West was more interested in protecting Armenia as well. The end result being a victory for Armenia, which was able to gain de facto control of Nagorno-Karabakh, at the expense of Azerbaijan casualties. It's not surprising Armenia is very passionate about protecting the land of Armenians, after they were victims of the first recorded genocide and ethnic cleansing.
The Armenian genocide was too much, man!
But either way, the relations between these two nations will never be the same, as if they were ever good. But as they got older, things began to change. Armenia was becoming a democracy, while Azerbaijan became an authoritarian regime focused on revenge. Their economies were growing, they increased their diplomacy, and Azerbaijan got a load of oil. Yeah, sorry Armenia, we gotta get that oil. As Azerbaijan exported its oil to Europe, it became much richer and stronger. But Russia is still a strong Armenian ally and protects them when Azerbaijan tries to flex its power at the border. Until Russia started the war in Ukraine. When Russia was occupied, Azerbaijan seized the opportunity to finally get their revenge on Armenia. There were multiple brief attacks in the last couple years, with Azerbaijan claiming to free the region from Armenia, who has been brainwashed by the West, with all of the things they have done for Armenia. This time, Russia was unable to support Armenia despite their military alliance. And in September 2023, Azerbaijan officially started to annex Nagorno-Karabakh. So both sides at this point have annexed this region. But here's the thing. They don't want to be a part of Azerbaijan.
Yeah, we chose Mom hands down. I thought we made that clear at the lawyer's office and in the comments under your weird rant on Facebook.
Armenia has been left unable to defend itself. And once Azerbaijan seized control, almost the entire population fled the region to Armenia. They have made it perfectly clear they want nothing to do with you. Now images from the area are very unsettling, and it's basically a ghost town. I'm not surprised, since with all of Azerbaijan's talk of assimilating the population, there was a strong sense of unity from their previous trauma. Azerbaijan does not respect Armenia's desire to protect all Armenians, which might make sense when it involves land in your territory, but Azerbaijan also makes claims of absolving a large territory from Iran, which has a sizable Azeri population, more than the population of Azerbaijan. I don't have an opinion, just saying it's kind of a double standard. We've reached the unfortunate end of the Republic of Artsakh, and honestly, I am very mad at how the world has failed Armenians. People allow Turkey to have them not recognize the genocide. Our democracy-loving West has let these events happen because of oil, then Russia abandoned them. There is even concern of Azerbaijan continuing a full invasion of Armenia, with even rumors of concentration camps. I know I'll get some comments siding with Azerbaijan here, but listen, when you talk about committing genocide towards people who experienced genocide, it's not hard to not take your side. Of course Armenia is looking towards the West, because y'all suck. But the West won't really prioritize their sovereignty. For what it's worth, I think you're pretty cool. I wish we lived in a world that allowed people to be independent and not stuck in conflicts over race or religion, because then this happens, and then this happens. These stupid lines have created countries that don't recognize the will of entire ethnic groups, that are way too defensive about borders, that were completely artificial, and with the sole purpose of rights for only one group of people, that will attack anyone nearby with any amount of criticism. Wait a second. I think I know my next target for this series. Coming out way too far from now. Stay tuned, and thanks for watching. And I hope you take better care of yourself than these countries did.